Greetings and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to talk about driving a car on the tracks and why that's not recommended. But first I'd like to talk about a couple of things that don't warrant their own videos. The first is parking close to a railroad track. Your vehicle always needs to be at least one outstretched arm away from the closest rail, because if you park any closer, your vehicle has a good chance of getting hit by a locomotive. Trains are wider than the railroad tracks. Back on Conrail, when I was working in Croxton Yard in Jersey City, part of my job was to pull trains out of the yard up to the Marion switches on the P&H branch. That's the Passaic and Harsoness Cove branch. But between Croxton Yard and the Marion switches, there was a nightclub, and its parking lot was right adjacent to the tracks. And frequently customers would park too close to the tracks, and the train could not get by without hitting the vehicles. So I would always pull up to the car and stop the train and call the Croxton Yard master and ask him to call the Conrail police, because we weren't allowed, my crew wasn't allowed to go into the nightclub because they served alcoholic beverages. So we would wait for the Conrail police, and the police would go into the nightclub, find the driver, and have him move the vehicle. Now, while we were waiting for this, the train, the rear end of the train, was still in the yard, impeding yard operations. And the terminal superintendent didn't like that. One day I was coming on duty, and the terminal superintendent said to me, "The next time you see a car parked too close to the tracks, just crash into it and keep on going." Now his nickname was Crazy, and I didn't listen to him. Another problem that I wanted to talk about was passengers waiting on passenger train platforms for a passenger train. And along comes a freight train operating on the track right next to the platform. When that happens, it's a good idea to step back away from the edge of the platform, well behind the yellow line. In fact, if you were familiar with railroad operations, you'd step even further back away from the edge of the platform. And that being because freight trains frequently have things banding, dragging, or something sticking out from the side of the train, maybe a piece of lumber or a plug car door sticking out. You don't want to be too close to a train, a freight train. You definitely don't want to be standing on the edge of the platform looking down the track as the freight train approaches. Don't do that. The freight train engineer would be very grateful if you didn't do it. Now on to driving on the tracks. Frequently at night, drivers driving under the influence will drive over a railroad crossing, and as they do, they will make either a right or left turn onto the railroad tracks, as if they thought the railroad tracks were a side street. Once you do that, the car gets stuck on the tracks because the frame of the car rests on the rail and the wheels don't have any traction. This requires a tow truck to get the vehicle off the rail, and potentially damaging the undercarriage of the vehicle. Not to mention that your vehicle is sitting on a railroad track and could be hit by a railroad train. There was one instance where we were running a train from North Jersey to Philadelphia at night, and we were on SEPTA's Trenton line. And as we were motoring along, we could see in the distance a man standing on a crossing, waving his arms violently, trying to get us to stop. And we did get stopped. And the conductor walked down to meet the guy, and his vehicle was stuck on the tracks, and the lights were off, no lights on the vehicle, and it was we couldn't see it, very hard to see until we got very close to it. And the conductor told the driver, after he realized that the driver was drunk, told the driver that he might want to leave the scene and get out of the area because we had called for the police. The driver refused. He wanted to stick around, and the police came and arrested him for drunk driving and had his vehicle towed off the tracks eventually. Another example, and a rather strange one, of driving onto the tracks was when we were operating a train on Conrail from Harrisburg to North Jersey on the Lehigh line. We had noticed earlier that the 13th Street Railroad crossing in Manville, New Jersey was out of service. There were barricades on each side of the track because the crossing, the pavement, had been ripped up, and they were replacing the crossing. The crossing was in the process of being replaced. So there was no pavement, and you could not drive from one side of the tracks to the other, and that's why the barricades were up. Well, the train ahead of us hit a vehicle at the crossing in Manville, and of course he was stopped, waiting for emergency responders and assistance, and we got stopped behind that train, and we could hear on the radio the progress of getting the vehicle off the tracks. And the next day, I read in the newspaper that the incident involved a handicapped van with a handicapped person in a wheelchair in the rear of the van, and the driver crashed through the barricades and onto the railroad tracks where the vehicle became stuck, of course. And but the driver got the handicapped man out of the van and wheeled the wheelchair off to the side, and then the driver took off and ran away and left the fella in the wheelchair to watch as his van got broadsided by the next train. The driver later turned himself in to the police, and the police charged him with ignoring the highway barricade, reckless driving, interfering with interstate commerce, and leaving the scene of an accident. But he was not charged with driving under the influence. So remember, when you're out driving, railroad tracks are made for flanged wheels, not rubber ones. Take care and put some sand down.